The complaint. Dear Mr. Mike Fleiss, my grandson looked up on the internet and found out that you are the producer of The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, and also Bachelor in Paradise. I have a few things to say, but I will not address BIP since my mother taught me to ignore bad manners, and that show is definitely bad manners, despite everyone watching it while eating chips and drinking wine, even though they won't admit it. First of all, this is not a complaint letter. This is a fan letter. But with suggestions for your franchise. Bachelor Nation is successful, but it could be more successful. During Sean's season, you had a grandmother drive up in a limo with her granddaughter. Now, it makes entirely good sense to introduce your granddaughter to such a nice boy as that Sean, who clearly isn't on the make, as we used to call it. My question for you is, what about the grandmother? She didn't look married to me. And do you realize how many grandparents are out there who are looking for love? I remind you that we are the baby boomers and that husbands die earlier than their wives. We even have our own organization, AARP. They accept advertising. You are missing a major opportunity. I really am incensed that all these girls are in their 20s. These girls do not need help. The more mature women, like myself, who have lost or ditched our husbands, are the ones who would be there for the right reasons and who would listen to our hearts. These young people cannot possibly know their own minds at their age like we do because we have seen the trials of life. What you definitely need to do is start the Bachelorette for older women. For one thing, most of us are not going to go on those internet dating sites. One of my church friends did it and wound up with a sociopath. You could call your show The Bachelorette A. It may be hard to find 25 breathing, 65-plus-year-old men with enough money to travel to casting, yet that fact alone would help the Bachelorette choose. Because, as anyone knows, no woman in her right mind wants a man who can't afford an occasional trip. Now, you could have trouble finding 2, let alone 25, suitable men for Bachelorette A that have the kind of abs you all seem to be obsessed with. Please do not concern yourself. We are not obsessed with muscles anymore. A beer gut of over 20 pounds, however, might be a deal breaker. Perhaps not, though. You could hand out those Spanx-like belts sold on Home Shopping Network. Maybe you could even get a quantity discount. Forget any worries about bald heads. None of us have an issue with that at our age. You know what they say about bald heads and prowess? Aha. One thing you need to watch out when choosing women for the Bachelorette A are those facelifts. I'm not at all sure those would photograph well on television, judging from the movie stars. Plus, those duck lips are definitely out. Despite how tempting it is to fix your face, when you take off your clothes, you're in major trouble if your age spots sprinkle your stomach or you've ever had a weight gain. Your skin just looks like wrinkled sandpaper. You wouldn't want anyone leaving after the fantasy suite claiming he'd been bamboozled. Speaking of appropriate attire, the Bachelorette A ought to be allowed to wear sleeves at all times. If she goes out any of those beach dates, she wouldn't want her arms flapping in the wind like a surrender flag. Plus, and this is critical, every season you make someone rappel down an office building, then smooch halfway down. None of us will do it because in that harness, our ass would look like a sack full of potatoes. Plus, there's just every reason to think that some man will have a heart attack halfway down, ruining everything. Be sure to include some good dancing. And I don't mean that hugging to the tune of a band getting free advertising out in the middle of some piazza in Italy. I'm talking about the real thing, either rock and roll or a big band. It's been said that dancing is laughing in the face of death. Most women want a man that can dance. Now, you have to be careful about people's children. No contestant will be allowed to meet anyone's kids until after the fantasy suite. Most of us need all the help we can get on that score, though we love them to death. Our kids and their opinions, especially with all that eye rolling, can really get in the way of letting go. Plus, Chris Harrison should be instructed to lecture the contestants on remembering they are choosing and being chosen for themselves, not for those kids. Most of that kind of thing can be worked out unless someone's a gold digger. You probably will need a lawyer for that one. Another benefit of the Bachelorette A is that it would flummox Reality Steve. I've watched him on the internet and he looks about 30 himself. He has consistently spoiled the results on all your versions of Find Love the Easy Way through television, but he won't have a clue what we will do. These are my ideas for your new show, and I offer myself as a candidate for the first Bachelorette A. I am as good looking as anyone could expect at my age, and I'm not looking for health insurance. I'm just looking for love, like everyone else. Yours very sincerely, Lula. P.S. You might want to shorten the number of episodes. For one thing, people get tired flying all over the world like that. Plus, at our age, you never know what'll happen. So the next, thank you. The next story is from section 2, Listen. People all around tell themselves their own story. Start with the subject. A subject doesn't have to be totally fleshed out at first. You don't have to know everything about them, what's in their drawers and all, unless the junk drawer or something is what you're photographing. Then search, search, search to find that character's face somewhere, anywhere. While you're looking, be scrupulous in caring for your kids. Don't avoid them or forget they've got to eat and sleep and get to school on time. If you make a mistake with them, you'll hear about it from the authorities in your life and they'll be held to pay. Pretty much nobody will ever accept the excuse that you were looking for that particular person to take a picture of. Pretty much everyone thinks the camera is just a hobby, a pastime you can control if you really want, if you love your kids. It's better not to correct other adults. They'll just think you're crazy and it'll stir up self-doubt as well. Remember that eventually children grow up and husbands either leave or die. By that time, it's entirely possible you'll have found the subject's face, taken the picture and sold it to Aperture magazine or someplace that'll make you equally famous. You'll be able to relax, having done what you were created to do in the first place. People will understand then, and in their memories, make allowances. They leave, all of them, both children, and the thoroughly discontented husband. The husband made lots of money, enough to go around. You cry your tears, comfort your children, but underneath the grief pulses a long-lost relief. You clean the house top to bottom, rid yourself of the extraneous miscellany that distracted you from the camera. You excise the unnecessary from your closets, your cupboards, your garage, even your Rolodex. Just wad up that business card of your neighbor 2 doors down who went professional doing landscapes. Cram it into the trash bag. Take a deep breath. Make every effort to dispel your wish that her son gets into drugs. Your fingers caress the camera at the top of the closet where it's mostly been during the time it's taken for your family to get their own lives. Some years, you only took it off the shelf if it fit into your suitcase on family vacations, or when someone asked you to take pictures of their kids for free. You took a few courses, entered a few contests, even earned a little money. Not enough, however, to justify friends or babysitters or nannies to drive your kids to the opportunities you knew they'd resent not having when they grew up. But now they are grown up. One is in Europe studying economics so she can make her daddy proud. The other's a history major at the state university. They don't come home much. The history major called to tell you she's taking another art class, this time a photography class next semester. You're confused by your queasiness when she told you. You want her to appreciate art, even made her take lessons once. During the semester, she asked for extra money in her allowance so she could buy more film. You got queasy again, swallowed to keep what shouldn't come to consciousness from coming to consciousness. Of course, honey, you answered and sent the money. You force yourself to go out and snap pictures. This time you go to the local Starbucks with the other mommies retired from duty. As you point, click, and smile to gain cooperation, you secret the knowledge that you aren't like them at all. You think you recognize the character you've always searched for, blue eyes overly made up, black hair streaked with gray, and you feel a momentary relief. It turns out to be nothing. The woman has a red scar across the side of her face you didn't see at first, and you know that the very visibility of it ruins the character's mystery. For some other artist, of course, the scar would be the mystery, but not for you. Your daughter comes home for spring break. Proudly, she opens a black leather portfolio her boyfriend gave her for Christmas. She pulls out 10 black and white 11 by 14s on resin-coated paper. They are landscapes and strangers' faces and the implements of people's jobs, a tree-studded median on a highway, a white tramp with a sparkly coat, and rusting shovels against a garage door. They are good photographs, really good. With a pinch of vanity, you imagine them hanging on a museum wall. The printing, she reports, was called exquisite by her teacher, who happens to be famous, and you must agree. Your daughter speaks. I love it so much. My teacher says I can change majors and only lose a semester and a half. Do you think Dad will pay? Do you? If not, I don't care. I've got to do this. I just can't believe I'm only now realizing what I want to do with my life. Your daughter's face is a light. She's never looked more herself. Your heart softens, glad for her, but you run to the bathroom and lean over the toilet anyway. The bile is the worst thing you've ever tasted, acidic, bitter, worse even than the morning sickness you had for 9 months with both girls, while other women suffered only 3. You fear you'll never rid yourself of the taste. You splash cold water on your cheeks, in your mouth. When you lift your hot face up and run your tongue over your teeth, your eyes meet your eyes in the mirror. Notice the daylight from the window bounces off the sprinkle of silver in your hair. You long for your camera, a proper dark room for after the picture is snapped. And you'll support me to Dad, won't you? She calls from the other room. Avert your eyes. Avert eyes. Avert. Thank you. And this is called Stamp. And it's in section 3 about choosing. Dark, of course, but light illuminated from the parking lot filtered through the cheap grass shades when Jennifer got home from her class. It was 10:30 after all. She stopped outside when she left her car to relish the full silver white moon. She was pretty sure that, although she didn't know that boy man's name, for the rest of her life, she would link the memory of that moon with the remembrance of his rosemary breath, of his rough fingers laced with hers. Such a quick connection after a normal, routine stop at the mailbox on 5th Street. Jennifer hadn't even noticed him walking up at the same time as she did. Always after her class, she felt an adrenaline rush to get her day over with, her duties checked off the list she planted in her head just to keep her world afloat. Yet when she arrived in front of the mailbox, there he was. Slow gets it all done, he said. She startled. Of course she did. Stopped immediately at such an intimate statement. They stood for a moment, looking at each other. He leaned over, gentle and sure, pressed his dry lips against hers. The moonlight seemed to force everything to clarity. Absence of light in the apartment helped her deception as she stepped over her husband's trousers, almost certainly oil stained from the garage. She made herself nude, as always. Then she gingerly expertly lifted the sheet that covered his snoring frame and her empty spot next to him. She crawled into their bed, turned her back to him. She curled into a tight little S shape, then thought better of it. She slipped off the thin gold plate wedding ring, which was all he could afford those years ago. She dropped it onto the side table. Light from the window bounced just a bit off the thin gold circlet, now so much duller than it was at the start. The band, smaller than a postage stamp, poised just on the edge of the table, ready to fall. And thank you. And this is called Extol Him Who Rides on the Clouds. Call me Magdalene, not Maggie, not Meg, and certainly not Dolly, for God's sake. Call me Magdalene. Let the syllables roll off your tongue slowly, slowly. Let the connotation seep into your stomach, your very skeleton, your middle there. Take a breath. Narrow your eyes. What do you want? Think, do you really love your life, your job, your grown children, your spouse? Is what you have now really enough for you? Take another breath. Touch my cheek, my silver sheathed breast, me. Keep breathing now. Hear the raging air blowing all around us. Feel the wind's unpredictability. Sense the precipice beneath our toes. Smell the gift. See how our bodies sway just before we're beyond choice. How our chests cease to heave. We fly for an instant, holding each other for an infinite moment of understanding. See the puffs of dust rise in frilly clouds that our bones make as they crack on the sun-scorched earth. Author's note: somebody famous said, real writers steal. I don't know if I'm real, but I am certainly a thief. For example, I plagiarize the Bible, specifically Psalm 68. Plus, I filched Magdalene from church tradition that is also in writing by some dead white guys who, in a hubris-soaked fit of calling right wrong and wrong right, falsely accused her of prostitution. Also, I appropriate from another of God's creations, Moby Dick, a whale of a good story about the wrestling of evil with good. If you, dear reader, investigate for yourself these sources from which I gratefully steal what I am certain is now mine, you can also learn a lot about fishing. The end. Thank you.
They emerged from their chrysalises and flew away into the warm cave of my chest. Dim-sighted, they couldn't tell my bones and organs from the shadows. My mother did not scream as she grabbed the phone from my hand, and so the ambulance never arrived. The paramedics were not worried when I refused the ride. The economy had recently collapsed and our currency was worthless, so my mother never asked me where we were going to get $6,000. Our dog didn't exist and wasn't let out. Also, the refrigerator was broken, so there were no groceries to put away. We left for the hospital, which turned out to be a large canvas tent in the Brazilian rainforest, immediately. It was 95 degrees in there. When the saline hit my stomach, it wasn't cold. The doctor's brother hadn't coaxed his Corvette off a cliff 6 months ago, so I didn't have to listen to that story as he rinsed my insides out. All this time, the moths were sound asleep. I couldn't bear to wake them, so I never threw up the empty cocoons. There was no activated charcoal. My stomach didn't balloon like an angry blister. My skin didn't ache from stretching, and I never spent 2 days vomiting chalky tar. In 1998, talk therapy was formally abandoned as an acceptable practice. I didn't have to make a counseling appointment before I left the hospital tent. Also, my mother didn't let me skip it 2 weeks later. Eventually, the moths grew so large I had to unzip my side and let them go. And this next piece, if this book had a center, I think this would probably be the center. This is also the longest poem in the book. This is called You Were an Interesting Case. 1, going in. The day you looked death in the face and told it to fuck all the way off, a pretty counselor walked beside you through the student center. The police kindly kept their distance until you arrived at the car, where the older one helped you fasten your seatbelt across the gray plastic seat. It was so low, you barely had to scrunch down. At the hospital, a nurse took your vitals and then led you through a series of push-button doors. On opening, each one leaned awkwardly away from its partner. The nurse left you in the observation area, and after a while, the counselor left too. A new nurse came and drew your blood. Then a different one came with pizza and French fries. The dessert, of course, was unidentifiable, and your roommate laughed at it when he popped by to say hello. The food nurse wanted a urine sample, and though you'd never been arrested, the bathroom reminded you of jail. The steel toilet was smeared with shit. The handicap rails sported brown handprints, and you thought it best not to complain. Like a good student, you answered every question, called your family, even emailed your study partner. Angry and rejected, death looked on. You both cried a little bit. Eventually, you were taken upstairs. 2, the red woman. Long before death came into the picture, she was there. The red woman, a pure and vivacious rage. On a long and drunken walk home last April, she slipped into your shoe like a pebble from the riverbank. Your mind slid into her like a warm bath. She said, break the mirror, punch the wall. Your body obeyed. The next morning, you could only finger the bruises as you watched coffee brew. Summer was a blur. She'd show up, sometimes empty-handed, sometimes with a bottle of cheap Pinot, and the world was only corners, only knives and walls and mirrors and morning after morning with dried blood and Mr. Coffee. You didn't bother with Band-Aids or explanations. In late July, you finally let her move in, even got a new tattoo to mark the occasion, a keyhole on your ribs so she could see out. But when she invited death into your bed last night, you knew they both had to go. You didn't know she was here at the hospital until a disheveled woman in a blue nightgown wandered into your supposedly safe room at 5 a.m. Under a blanket that reeked of sour spit, greasy scalps, and piss, you pretended to be asleep. She muttered, white bitches. Why are all these white bitches lying in these beds? They're just lying. I will set this whole place on fire. I'll burn every last one of these bitches up. 3, humor. In the event you should like to make a joke, ask to borrow the red marker. Use it to carefully color in the letters on your milk carton. Try to imagine you are climbing the hills of the M, or perhaps they are sand dunes or snowdrifts, You haven't been outside in 4 days. It's meditation hour, so the television screen in the activity room is taunting you with piney forests, austere mountain lakes, fields of wildflowers and random deer. The accompanying music is of the serene variety, usually reserved for acupuncturist offices. Speaking of needles, you got this milk carton from an addict. He drinks at least 3 milks with every meal, but has no teeth, so it's hard to tell if he's absorbing the calcium. In his honor, and the red woman's too, if you're being honest, you add a festive drop of blood just beneath the straddled legs of the K. You show it first to the friendly old man who almost killed his brother-in-law last week. You tell him, hey, look, it's milk for vampires. Then you turn to the bearded woman coloring a butterfly who recently mistook her chest for a knife block and say, got any Kotex? I think the K sprung a leak. On the screen, an unidentifiable farm animal, goat, sheep, grazes near the base of an oak tree. Behind it, gray mountains rise like the constant prayers of the pregnant sex worker sitting one table over. Nobody laughs. It's not that kind of joke. 4. Valium and Atarax. The Lord doesn't speak to you like he did to your cousin. Instead, you watch from the flooded floor of the shower room as the red woman slithers aboard the dark ship, the one that carried Tennyson's Good King Arthur away. She is a serpent with an apple in her belly, or maybe she is a ghost like the king. The king is still here somewhere, though poor Sir Bedivere has long since gone home to his grief. The red woman rocks with the ship, the night and the water indistinguishable from sleep. She once said she was heartless, so you lent her yours. She returned it seemingly intact, save for a single splinter, bright and growing like a winter's dawn. In the galley, the red woman taps her foot on a rotting floor, and somehow this translates as a pulse. She begins to dance a waltz, her bare blue feet finding every corner, brown toenails snapping off one by one, and your mind becomes the air in a car speeding past a country graveyard, prickly and full of gasps. 5. Diagnosis and discharge. Praise the 3 wise doctors, for they have given it a name, and that name has been fruitful and multiplied. Now there's a word for the days you spent drifting in and out on the couch, binge watching BBC period dramas and forgetting to eat. A word for the first 2 weeks of every quarter in junior year when you never stopped. Best of all, a pair of words for the intolerable sharpness, the screaming thoughts and tapping fingers, the toe-stubbing agony of sitting through lecture classes. With this new vocabulary came little white pills, each one a pure and perfect prayer to stop the swinging. This is what they sent you home with. Your mother met you on the other side of the doors, and you let her hug you. Let her see her youngest and most difficult child still intact. Your apartment looked like it did 5 days ago. True to their nature, the cats purred as they wound their steadfast and thready love around your feet. The nose ring they made you take out slid back in with minimal fuss. You took a long shower, conditioned your hair, put on nice deodorant. You'd missed yourself too much to put on clothes, so you crawled into bed naked. While you lay there watching Girl Interrupted and realizing no one would believe any of this happened, Death and the Red Woman sat in your kitchen. always run out of air when I'm reading that. Okay, so this is the final piece that I'll read, and this is, well, I'm going to show it to you just because it's easier to understand. So this is an erasure poem or a blackout poem. These are, this is an erasure of some discharge instructions from hospital. So this is called Staying After Discharge. 1, work with your illness. Learn self-management. Read books and people. Use every imaginable source. 2, accept a long, painful, and difficult recovery. Accept that it's your fault. 3, take responsibility. 4, guard your sleep. 5, learn which stresses are the most difficult to manage. 6, make life predictable. 7, evaluate your limitations for this week, for this month, for this year, for your lifetime. Enlist your friends and family in this process. 8, join a self-help group. 9, take your medications if you're unhappy, but by all means, don't make changes by yourself. 10, ask for help. 11, be honest. Withhold anything you know is important. 12, discuss alcohol with your therapist. 13, recovery often isn't patient. There will be ups and downs. 14, make a plan with your friends and family. This is called relapse. If a relapse can be dealt with aggressively, it can usually be prevented altogether. Make a list of signs. Plan to reduce structure and support when signs occur. Thank you.